Welcome back. Please welcome the panelists to the stage for Technology Changing Lives, moderated by Franz Pasha, Chief Corporate Affairs Officer for PayPal.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Franz Pasha. I work at PayPal as the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer. For those of you who aren't already part of the PayPal community, we are a company of 400 million consumers and merchants. We're based in the US, but we're very proud to have our international offices here in Singapore and to be part of the Singapore community. I first want to just say how we were talking about this backstage. It's fantastic. For some of us, this is our first event like this, and certainly panel like this, to be in person. And it's a real tribute to the city of Singapore, to the government of Singapore, and to the Milken Institute that we could do this and that it has gone so smoothly. So thank you for that. It's a real honor to be moderating this session on technology changing lives, particularly in a room full of leaders who are thinking about the role technology can play, that it has played and that it will play. And I have a terrific panel here, which I'll quickly introduce, but they'll have an opportunity to say something about each other and about themselves. So first, let me introduce Melissa Wong, who I can call Mel, so when I say Mel, you'll know. The Group Chief Digital Officer of Baltic. And Victor Alexiev, the Head of Incubation D10X, City Ventures. Anand Swaminathan, the Senior Partner and Head of McKinsey Digital Asia at McKinsey & Company. And Karen Bajwa, Vice President for Asia Pacific, Google Cloud. Before I hand off to this panel, I'll just say a few words. It's certainly, we've had a lot of learning during the pandemic about the role that digital technology can play in meeting people and communities' evolving needs, and certainly the needs of business. And we've seen the tremendous acceleration of digital trends. And certainly, just speaking from the perspective of digital payments, we've seen acceleration in digital payments probably 3 to 5 times during the 20 months of the pandemic of what we would have expected. We've had a lot of learning. We can see consumers functioning differently, certainly, merchants and businesses functioning differently. And on this panel today, we're going to explore some of those learnings, what from each of our perspectives we've seen from our vantage points. And then after some discussion, also sort of point to the future and see what we can see ahead. So I'd like to just start with the panel, and maybe we'll just work our way across to maybe say a few words of your vantage point from where you sit in your sectors and within your companies, what you've sort of drawn out of the pandemic on what you're seeing about adoption of digital technology, and what you think are some of the factors that are here to stay. So Victor, I'll hand off to you.
Thanks, Franz. And I just wanted to say it's an honor to be part of this high-profile panel, and it's also an honor to be not in shorts for the first time in the last 18 months, I think, when we do this. My vantage point is, prior to Citi, I spent about 12 years as an entrepreneur, had a few successes, had a few failures. So from this point, kind of digital first, remote first was kind of native to me. So it was less of a shock for me and my team who have a similar profile. But really the way to interpret the pandemic's impact on digital, or at least the way that most organizations experience digital, is through 3 lenses, I would say. One, it's about testing really the digital readiness and digital infrastructure for our organizations. And this was not ubiquitous. Different organizations, I think, handled it differently. I think for most of the banks and institutions that represent financial infrastructure, February, March in particular last year was a very stressful month. where you could really, truly, and this is no secret, experience the cracks and low difficulties that were taken apart. I think it was also a test in terms of the ability to coordinate, communicate digitally with clients, with each other. And I think, different organizations handle that differently. And to this point, the second point is essentially the second experience is digital divide became very visible. Digital divide within organizations amongst generations, as well as digital divide amongst various geographies, geopolitically, as well as amongst different organizations. So organizations who were digitally native handled the pandemic very differently, and actually to them, this was a growth opportunity. Organizations that weren't struggled a lot. So you may not know, but many FMBs, for example, had to convert FMBs who were refusing, for example, to move on to digital delivery, booking of payments and delivery of food and etc., as well as many, many others. So different parts of us experienced the pandemic differently. Also, it's probably important to say that generationally, I mean, I've had to help some of our seniors get onboarded and handle, remote desktop and, build practices on how to manage their teams well enough. And then the last piece is I think there was a point at which, especially this year, we've understood how deeply connected we are based on exactly the digital infrastructure, but also what are the risks and issues with that connectivity, as we've seen from social media influencing our lives and opinions and psychology, as well as many other systematic entanglements. So this is the vantage point that I've been taking from my point of view.
Well, Karen, I know Google Cloud has certainly been at the heart of the matter of enabling a lot of that change, so maybe we can hand off to you.
Well, first of all, Franz, let me say that this feels very surreal. This is the first time in 18 months I've stepped out and I'm sitting in an audience room full of people without a mask. It feels human again.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. Look, I joined my stint with Google about 18 months ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And I worked with my colleagues for 18 months, and some of them I met for the first time ever today. So it's a great feeling. Now, from a view of the last 18 months, let me give you a consumer view as well as an enterprise view. And being at Google, I have the pleasure of having both the views in that sense. On the consumer side, we just did a very recent study along with Bain and Temasek, where we found that, let's say, Southeast Asia has about 590 million people. Of that, about 75% of those people are online, 40 million of them for the first time this year. The good news is 9 out of 10 people who actually went online in the last 18 months have stayed online. They continue using, which means this trend is here to stay. People are adopting digital and online in their daily lives in an unprecedented manner. Then you switch over to enterprises, and you will see before the pandemic, and Anand would, being in the consulting world, he would realize everyone spoke about digital. Digital was a part of everyone's strategy. There was no enterprise I knew of that did not have digital in the strategy. What has changed in 18 months is from digital being in the strategy, digital is the strategy now. And that's the change that I have seen. In many cases, technology was never the barrier. Our views about how we use technology. The most eye-opening conversation was with the CEO of an insurance company, and I asked her, I said, have you gone paperless? He said, yes. Could you have gone paperless 18 months ago? Absolutely no. Which means technology was not the issue. It was how we adopted, embraced it. So that is a fundamental mindset change of how people, and then there are digital natives like Boltec that actually are technology first, cloud first in that manner. The advantage also is that while there is this huge inflation of technology use happening, there's also models of technology that have matured out that were not available a few years ago, which is the consumption model of technology. SaaS-based models, cloud-based models, bring down the entry barrier of technology usage significantly from the old way of buying a hardware and a software and maintenance and putting it all together. It took you months before you could realize the first benefit. To now you actually go in and you are up and running in hours, if not days. And that's been the change that is happening.
And you see this across a number of clients, so it'd be great if you can pull together some of that.
Thanks again, Franz. And it's been very interesting to see it in many sectors. I love the fact that technology enables any sector and every sector, and the adoption rates are certainly there. And thinking about something like digital or technology adoption, what we saw in the last 2 years fundamentally is more than what we've seen in the last 20 years. The question is, will that pace of change continue? And if it does, what are some of the trends that are perhaps here to stay, to your earlier point? Maybe things such as automation. If we think about next level automation, we kind of did a little bit of a study here, and McKinsey typically likes our research and our data, and the McKinsey Technology Council, which is made up of technologists from both externally as well as internally from McKinsey, looked at 80 technologies that said, are these really going to be trends? Are they going to change the way or not? And we came up with 10 trends, but just one or two of them as examples. One was truly around next generation automation, things like Industry 4.0, things like IIoT. Our research suggests that perhaps 50% of all the work that happens today could be automated by 2025. That's a pretty significant amount of work that can change through digital transformation. If we then think about something like distributed infrastructure, so edge computing, cloud computing, again, the research suggests that more than 75% of all the data we will have access to in the next 5 years will be created through edge devices or cloud computing capabilities. That's where we're going to get it from. So if we don't drive adoption, it's not going to happen. And perhaps the final trend around connectivity. At the end of the day, 5G is a connectivity and a capability. Again, the research suggests that perhaps 80% of the population in the world will have access to 5G and that degree of connectivity. So let's just imagine then what is the level of innovation that can happen if we are powered by technology and have access and inclusivity, which we'll talk about a little bit. If we have that, what is the real unlock? So those are some of the trends we're seeing and perhaps some of the trends that are here to stay.
Mel, you have the last word on this round, and I promise you the first word on the last round.
Fantastic. Thank you, Franz, and thanks, everybody. And also lovely to be here today in person. It has been a while since I think we've all come together, face to face. So let me give you some of my perspective from the role of an insurtech, so the industry perspective. BoltTech is an international insurtech. We participate in 3 continents across the globe, in Europe, in the US, as well as emerging economies in Asia. And really, what we've seen as an emerging insurtech, who is really the new kid on the block, we've seen 3 trends, that's come from the digitalization and the changes in digitalization. So the first one is the sharing economy. So the sharing economy has changed the way that everybody lives their lives, the way that people move from A to B, the way people work, the way people share their assets. With that, we see that risk, the consumer risk has changed enormously. And that means that from the perspective of traditional insurance companies, we actually have to meet that risk. We have to be able to adjust and manufacture products to meet that risk, as well as be able to provide, I guess, more accessible and affordable products within the shared economy. The second piece is really, if you sort of think about the last 20 months, and here in Southeast Asia, when we look at the internet penetration rates in Southeast Asia, sorry, I should say the insurance penetration rates in Southeast Asia, it's really a tiny 1.2%. Now, what has the global pandemic done? It's actually awakened a huge amount of consumers, millions of consumers, who have now realized the importance of basic health and being able to protect themselves and their families. It's a second trend. The third is very much around the what I call kind of financial inclusion. So being able to access affordable, simple, and easy insurance products through technology. And Franz, you talked about the work that PayPal's been doing. There are similar players in Southeast Asia who have been able to access millions of consumers who now have access to basic kind of financial platforms. And with BoltTech, we've been partnering with those platforms to be able to provide those really affordable and very easy insurance products. Thank you.
And we'll come back to the financial inclusion question later. I want to pick up on something that Victor said, but direct the question to Anand. So Victor noted that some companies were ready for the kind of digital challenge of the last 18 months, and some weren't. And I'm curious, from your perspective at McKinsey, consulting with so many different companies, what were some of the factors you saw for success on being able to rise to the challenge of what was needed, and what was the impact on the customers of those companies when that went well and when it didn't go well?
Yeah. I do think Victor's point was excellent to say the digital divide the framework that you used, and I do feel one of our clients used the term digital haves and have-nots. And I think it is a real challenge that it's not equally distributed, it's not equally accessed, but how should we think about this? And if we just start with Asia real quick, Franz, and then we'll double click onto this. One of the things that we did a couple months ago, we did a bit of research to say, in our Future of Asia series, we talked about technological leapfrogging here in Asia. So we started with a basis that says, well, within the next 5 years, more than 50% of the global GDP will be right here in Asia, will be generated by Asia. It also, today, 36% of the patents, 36% of the tech unicorns are based here in Asia, with more than 40% of the VC money that comes into Asia. Then you say, all right, that means what are we doing with patents? 67% of all the patents that are filed, anything on technology, are filed right here in Asia. So this is just telling us that the user base, you talk through the users as well, 50% of all the internet users in the world, of the 4 billion internet users, are right here in Asia. In order to then get this right, companies are saying, what is the technology talent that we need to have? What is the base we need to have in order to be successful? And they're looking at 3 dimensions of this. They're starting to say, I need the right skills at scale. So they're starting by saying we can't just have a series of engineers or series of technologists or data scientists. We actually need them at scale in certain disciplines in our organizations. But then they think about, well, I can't just have engineers and data scientists. I have to think about how they apply in my sector. I love Melissa's point around, well, how do you apply them in the insurance sector? How do you apply them in the banking sector? So a data scientist, what does AI actually mean in banking and insurance versus what might it mean in a manufacturing sector? So the context of the industry then matters for the talent. The third part then is being able to work from anywhere, or that flexibility of that operating model and the new ways of working that exist. So the talent is starting to look at, do I have access to each of these things? In thinking through this, the question then becomes, well, how do we avoid the digital divide? How do organizations really embrace this? And one is, well, we need to create the accessibility. We need to create accessibility of technology in the economies that we're operating in to our customers. And fundamentally, it's actually changing the experience that we will have with our customers. How do we enable them to be more successful? I think the point around, it's not just about me serving a customer. Yeah. It is now actually about creating economic value for that customer, that they can create value beyond just themselves. That is a mindset shift and a change that has fundamentally happened through, at least coming out of the pandemic, which I don't think we had seen at scale before. Well, if you've reimagined then how we serve our customers, the next part of it then is, what is the technology and how do we actually reimagine the core of our business? And I think, again, organizations are stepping back and saying, it's not just about touching the edges or just being able to say, can I band-aid my legacy applications or legacy technology? Instead, how do I reinvent the core? I love the fact that there's this advertisement, there's a billboard of Netflix that says, don't lose hope, we started with DVDs. And you think about the fact that Netflix today is streaming. They had to reinvent themselves, and we're also used to their latest technology and their latest capability on streaming. We forget they started as a DVD company that we put in the mail, and that's how they began. So I think it's reinventing the core, obsessing and thinking about the customers and how they will operate, but actually empowering our customers to create more value in the economy, not just saying we will serve them so they can get an outcome of it.
Yeah.
Maybe if I can just add something to Anand's point. While I absolutely agree to the potential and the growth opportunity that bringing so many people on board does or have, one of the challenges that we have is that key people, key stakeholders that are decision makers, strategy makers, investors in that space don't have direct experience. So when we talk about, it's not only about the capacity of engineers,
Right.
it's the capacity of people who have to structure problems and build strategies to essentially deploy towards.
It's a great point.
And that acts as a resistance to a large extent to that.
So I want to pick up on the point you made on about economic empowerment, and certainly, in addition to the digital divide, the pandemic really opened the lid and showed us just how economically divided, what the disparities were in wealth and income and in well-being. And for those of us working in fintech, and now I'm going to direct this question to Mel. For those of us working in fintech, it posed a real challenge. How can we do more in this urgent time of need to support individuals, families, and communities who haven't been well served by the financial system? And certainly during the pandemic, those challenges were accentuated and sharpened. And I know you've thought a lot about this, and certainly your company has served many people who need that access. So maybe you can provide a little perspective on what you saw during the last 20 months in this challenge.
Yeah, sure, Franz. So when perhaps I could start with a bit of a story, right? And how insurance and insurtech is changing people's lives through technology. Let's take you to maybe Indonesia, Bayu. He's a person who's lost his job in the pandemic. He's taken on a part-time job in one of the ride-sharing platforms. He goes out, he wakes up every day and goes out and faces enormous risks in his everyday life. Before the pandemic, before the acceleration of digitization, Bayu would never have access to basic insurance. It's something that he probably didn't even think about. With the emergence of technology platforms, what we've been able to do through using interesting data sets, using real-time information coming through, Bayu can now wake up, he can open his app, he can find his first ride, he can turn on insurance, he can go out, face the enormous risk that he faces every day in the Indonesian traffic. And if something happens to him, he's covered. And not only that, he can go home and he can turn off that insurance immediately. And that's what technology's done for this industry. I mean, most of you probably brought your, or even have your annual health cover provided by your employees, your stable kind of employers. Bayu doesn't have and can't afford that. And today, really, that's really what fintech, insurtech is doing for economies and millions of individuals that actually have not been able to afford insurance in the past. BoltTech has been working, as I mentioned before, with some of the largest e-wallet providers in Southeast Asia, PayMaya, Rabbitline Pay. What that has really done, what these platforms have done has actually allowed enormous millions of customers to be able to do basic electronic payments, digital payments. And in doing that and working in partnership in cohorts with these platforms who have already gained the trust of millions of consumers in Southeast Asia, what's happening is then that we can ride off that and actually increase the awareness of consumers to the risks that they face and be able to provide really simple, affordable services that millions perhaps hadn't had before.
Thank you for that. Certainly we can relate to that work and the work we do at PayPal. So Karen, I want to maybe draw you in here on, certainly, and you spoke in your intro about this, but certainly Google Cloud has played a major role in enabling the kinds of changes that major enterprises have had to take on. I wonder if you can give us a little perspective from inside the world of Google Cloud as the pandemic arose, and I'm sure that the incomings were quite extraordinary for how your services were going to be brought to bear. Maybe you can help us understand some of the perspective from where you sit.
Sure, sure. If I step back and think about what are the 3 to 4 areas we were working on before the pandemic, and then I apply it to how does it relate to the pandemic, and I'm not saying we could predict anything, but there were 3 main things we were focused on. Transforming the workplace, the new ways of working, the whole data transformation. It was clear data is the new currency, and people have to aggregate the multiple sources of data. They have to apply analytics for meaningful insights. It's a business imperative. Data is the new business imperative. And the third thing we were focused on was starting to build AI into businesses and how does it apply in different use cases. And all of these 3 things suddenly apply a whole lot in the pandemic. Now, I spoke earlier about what changed is not technology. What changed is the attitude to technology, and what changed is the democratization of technology. Prior to the pandemic, most enterprises almost had an elitist way of adopting technology, which means the higher up in the hierarchy you are, the higher end SKUs you would get for technology, and as you go down, everybody needs the same features and capabilities now. There is a massive democratization. Let me give you a few examples on how this applies to different industries. I'll start with the most relevant one today, which is healthcare. For years together, we've all tried to do telehealth, remote health. We've succeeded in pilots, never on scale. What the last 18 months have told you is that it was always possible. I had faced the challenge of being both in the wave 1 and wave 2 in the pandemic in India, and there was a massive scale of impact. I myself was impacted, my entire family was impacted, and I experienced how healthcare can be delivered on scale. Doctors were not available. In spite of who you knew and whosoever you are, you cannot get access to healthcare. And that was when remote healthcare on scale was implemented, and we saw that. I hope we never go back to the old ways of delivering, and we adopt this in a very different way. That is the most foundational way of using technology for delivering healthcare. There's much more we can do in research using AI in healthcare, predictive, and we're already working in a whole lot of these spaces. Let's take retail. We've seen how retail has stood up in this tough 18 months and kept the world going, including supply chains and the last mile altogether. Ultimately, retail is about putting the goods in the hands of the consumer when they want it. Last mile optimization, analytics, how do you manage inventories? And it's a whole lot of technologies that we've been able to deploy with many retailers working across the world, including Asia Pacific. And the conversation goes on, France. You go to the shop floor, the manufacturing shop floor, in many ways has been a laggard in the use of information technology, not technology. But again, there is massive work happening in terms of touchless interactions, visual fault monitoring, use of AI on the shop floor. So we are seeing a whole lot of those things happening. I go any sector and I see the use of technology, and it's for us been a fortune that we were almost ready with the technology in that sense, and we've seen the scale up happen.
Well, Victor, let me come back to you, and I'm still thinking about some of the things you said in your introduction, but I know in your work you've spent a lot of time thinking about how to validate new concepts, how to think about innovation, and also how to think about measuring impact. Over this last 20 months, have your views shifted as you think about how to measure what impact is for innovation, and what's changed?
So we've spent a lot of time on coming up with practices for innovation accounting internally, especially because a lot of the work that we do is essentially venture building, which is new products and services, new structures for the for Citi, access to new types of clients, and one of the things that we've understood is that you can't co-measure this as, for example, the same way you co-measure digital transformation, and so from that point of view. And also separate to this, there's a different growing understanding that impact is not only profitability, impact is not only, essentially the revenue that you can generate for the company. So examples that I can give you is we've rolled out recently a product called Bridge in NAM, which is essentially a marketplace for funding for up to $10 million loans. This is in support for You know, a lot of organizations that essentially, you know, had difficulties fundraising during the pandemic. And it has worked specifically well for MDIs, for essentially minority development institutions, to provide access. And there the impact is like we're currently not monetizing this platform, but the way we're looking at it is how much access are we creating, how much value are we creating, how many matches are we making for, you know, banks on one side and businesses on the other side, and where are these, you know, structurally. And this is to the point of, you know, essentially data availability. I think one of the points that I touched upon, but I didn't zoom into, prior to the pandemic, a lot of our digital transformation thinking was around creating channels to the customer. And so you'd have like this flashy app or flashy marketplace where things would happen and the handshaking and the, you know, but then in the back end, things would be a mess. You know, things wouldn't necessarily be very measurable. You'd need to rely on a lot of manual processing. And so now I think one of the shifts that's taken is like, how can I measure, execute, deliver end-to-end digitally? And so, for example, things like this were embedded into projects like Bridge, right? So it's not a something bolted on the old kind of machine.
Yeah.
And now the beauty of that is that essentially that has second and third tier impact to the organization. So once you see it done right, other parts of the organization start adopting. And we've started looking at ways to trace, you know, for example, how point of view and how this approach to product management, product delivery is being picked up by other parts of the organization. So when you talk about, you know, again, measuring impact of innovation, you know, there's of course the direct immediate impact that you can capture, but there's also second and third degree, which, you know, are a little bit less quantitative, but we're also looking at tracing and measuring collaboratively with the teams we work with.
It is interesting, and the product you're describing has a real focus on inclusion also, and I think that, and maybe I'll come back to you because I know McKinsey has been doing a lot of work on inclusive economies and inclusive recovery, and it's been an interesting phenomenon during the pandemic that there's been much more discussion about inclusive recovery and about ESG and about sort of rethinking ESG as being fundamental to how you think about innovation and how you think about transformation.
Yep.
So maybe you could share some of what you're seeing on that front.
I think the concept is so important today. Our global managing partner and CEO, Bob Sternfels from McKinsey, wrote a paper recently that says our future lives and livelihoods. But the tag then goes sustainable, inclusive, and growing. And the concept of thinking about sustainability and inclusivity and growth together, it's actually a simultaneous equation that many organizations struggle to solve. And it's frankly not a simultaneous equation many of us try to solve every single day either. But that mindset of saying, all right, if in order to power growth, I need to have an inclusive working model and an inclusive environment. If I'm not inclusive, then I'm never going to have enough of the demand that's going to come to be able to drive growth. In order to have that, if I don't do it sustainably, then I'm only creating demand for growth in my current generation. But what about all the future generations? So when we thought about the trends that are really associated around this, we thought about something like, okay, connectivity is a core metric and that we have to think about when we think about inclusivity. We talked about the trend of 5G, and we thought about, you know, how does connectivity play a role? Well, if truly the research is right, that it suggests 80% of the world's population will have access to 5G technology in the next 5 years, that's an inclusive model, and any organization that's working towards creating and enabling that level of inclusivity is fundamentally creating more opportunities for more individuals, more enterprises, more communities, more and more citizens around the world. But then if you say, well, once I've created the inclusivity, what about the sustainability? So clean tech is taking off, distributed technology is taking off to say, can I build products in a more sustainable manner? And then finally, it says, well, if I've done all that, growth still has to happen. If we don't create growth, we're not creating economic value anywhere in the environment. But if I can do it sustainably, if I can do it through inclusivity, we get to the right answer. And so that's our thesis and our premise on how we think organizations should be embracing the and across those three dimensions versus only being focused on one or the other.
I'm going to bring that home, embracing the and. It's a good line. So we're coming down to the last portion, and I promised that I would start with Mel on the last round. Face forward a bit, and we've learned a lot in the last 20 months, and we're still learning here today. But as you look forward, can you share a few thoughts, maybe a prediction, or even the identification of some trends you think are going to continue?
From the insurtech and insurance market, we're seeing one of the most, I would say, prevalent risks that's affecting everybody here today. We're not talking about kind of just emerging markets, we're talking about mature markets. As we've seen from the acceleration of digitization, every single one of us is now online. Right? 6 out of 10 people globally are online. And what does that mean? It's actually, funnily enough, and I don't know if some of you are aware, the biggest insurance gap in the world is actually cyber risk. It's actually the fact that each one of us is actually at risk today in everything we do, is the device that we wake up with and go to bed with. So when we, from Bolttech, are thinking about sort of future trends in the industry and what we need to focus on, it's very much around the cyber risk and ensuring that, that we're, one, increasing that awareness between all of us, and two, finding out, working with partners to find out really interesting ways to solve that for our consumers.
Well, let's come across, and Victor, you'll have the last word.
I think I'll go back to, Franz, truly the point on the trend of sustainability, inclusivity, and growth. Putting the and across these, I think that's going to be a trend. We haven't seen it yet, frankly. Yeah. I don't think we're seeing it at scale, hence the question. I think we're going to see that. The only other trend that I think is quite fascinating is the trend around digital and technology adoption. The rate at which we are adopting these new technologies and capabilities is fascinating. The fact that my 13-year-olds or my 11-year-old kids can actually do things with technology today, enable capabilities that just wasn't fundamentally possible. They're adopting it. They're already living it today. So I think the pace at which adoption is happening of technology and digital capabilities, it's going to be fascinating. But what I'm trying to teach the children is how do we think about sustainability, inclusivity, and growth if we can do all those three together.
I won't predict anything, but let me put down two aspects, an opportunity and a responsibility. Ultimately, what's happening after this 18 months is that the surface area of digitization is massively increasing, which means everyone there will use technology in some form, whether it is a consumer or an enterprise. The opportunity for us is to now work between the user, the provider, and the regulator in a model of partnership, which kind of accelerates the use of technology and builds in all the checks and balances. Technology can transform, but the virtues are not guaranteed, as history has told us in the past. The responsibility is, as the surface area of technology increases, suddenly explainability of AI, which is responsible AI, cybersecurity, and how do you build zero trust models into your core products, skilling, and ultimately sustainability are all very important things. Each technology provider has to think very differently. We took a bold goal of, we are already, as a company, Google Cloud is carbon neutral, and we've taken a bet to go carbon free by 2030. So these are the bets in terms of responsibility that companies will have to take.
All right, Victor, bring us home.
I have a number of thoughts here, and I'll start with one, which is when I mentioned digital divide, the reason why this is so important is over the last 18 months, we've brought a number of enterprises and consumers online. Those people don't know how to protect themselves online, don't know how to behave well online, and that's a problem. And that's a problem that the platforms will need to support the solution for. So cyber risks have exponentially increased and created vulnerabilities across society. So that's one definitely to think of. Second, in terms of finance in particular, there's a big trend in platformization of finance. There's embedded finance is becoming more of a theme. You may read here and there how pretty much every single company is becoming a fintech because it is able to offer financial services in context of their product. So I think I would be expecting a lot of acceleration of this. But with that comes a certain responsibility as well, because the ability to understand the product that you're using, the ability to take decisions and not be led by marketing is a critical one. And third, to the point of AI, I think it's time to acknowledge the fact that AI is as much of an ideology as a collection of technologies, right? So there's things to think of and address as a society, especially now as we have like kind of like a bifurcation from a geopolitical standpoint on how we are approaching data access, platform access, and etc. So I will see a lot of focus on these three areas over the coming years. And last but not least, when we talk about climate and ESG and etc., this requires a new model of doing business, but also a new model of valuing everything. And things that we put a zero price on right now, they don't have a zero price. So being able to price those in will be a critical task.
Thank you. So we're out of time. So it's left to me to, I want to thank each of our panelists. It was such a treat to be here in person. You gave us a lot to think about, and thank you for that. Thank you to the Milken Institute for bringing us together on this amazing occasion, and thank you, Singapore.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.